My girlfriend said, "You don't get to have an opinion because we're not married." After I found $15,000 missing from our house fund in a grocery aisle, she said it was her money, then let her family celebrate the house like nothing changed. I didn't argue. I scheduled the bank verification for their dinner, but when the advisor opened his folder, her mother asked the one question she'd been avoiding since the cereal aisle. "You don't get to have an opinion about what I do because we're not married." That was the sentence Vanessa used, standing in the cereal aisle of a grocery store, while her sister listened in on a video call she had forgotten to end. I used to think love meant being trusted enough to sit at the table when the decisions about our shared future got made. I found out, standing there under fluorescent lights with a cart half full of groceries, that I had only ever been allowed into the room after the decisions were already finished, after the money was already gone. I wasn't angry. Something in me went quiet, and it started counting exactly what I was looking at. This is the story of how that started, and how it ended 4 months later in a house that was never going to be mine. I work as a structural engineer, the kind of job where you spend your whole career looking for the hairline crack before it becomes the reason a building comes down. Vanessa worked in marketing coordination for a regional retail chain, the kind of job with deadlines that bled into weekends. We had been together 4 years, living together for 2 of them, in an apartment with a savings account we opened jointly and named the house fund, because we liked the idea of calling it something specific instead of just savings. Vanessa was generous in a way that looked good from a distance. She picked up checks at dinner with her friends, sent her mother money for groceries without being asked, and told me, more than once, "I've got it," whenever money came up, like the subject itself made her uncomfortable. I noticed, but I didn't push. 6 weeks before everything happened, I found out almost by accident, through a comment her sister made, that she had quietly given her younger brother $2,000 from her own account to help him cover a deposit, and never told me. I asked her about it once. She said it wasn't a big deal, that it was her money, and I let it go because $2,000 from her personal account felt like her business. The second time was smaller. I asked, casually, why a charge for nearly $400 had shown up on the joint card, and she snapped, "Why does it matter? It's covered," in a tone that ended the conversation before it started. I remember thinking that was strange for someone usually so easy to talk to. I didn't know yet how strange it would get. We were at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon, the cart half full, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. The notification was from the bank app, a fraud alert formatted like every other fraud alert I had ever ignored. A withdrawal of $15,000 from the house fund, transferred to an external account that morning. I stood there in the cereal aisle and read it twice, because the number didn't match anything I expected to see. I turned the phone toward Vanessa. "Did you see this?" She glanced at the screen, and something in her face shifted before she even answered, not surprise, recognition. "I can explain that. $15,000 is gone," I said. "Explain it now." She told me, standing in front of a shelf of cereal boxes, that she had transferred the money to her brother that morning. His food truck was failing, the lease was about to be terminated, and the supplier was threatening to cut him off. She said her brother had called her crying 2 nights before, and she hadn't been able to think about anything else since. She said she had been planning to tell me, just not yet, not until she figured out how to bring it up. Her sister was still on the video call, propped in her cup holder from earlier in the car, and I heard her say my girlfriend's name, low, like she was trying to get her attention without me noticing. Vanessa didn't look at the phone. She looked at me. A man pushing a cart past us slowed down without quite stopping. The way people do when they sense something happening but don't want to be caught watching. "That account is for us," I said. "For the house. I check it every week." "You knew that." "It's still partly my money," she said. "I put just as much into that account as you did." "That's not the point." "It is the point," she said, and her voice came up half a register, sharp enough that a woman near the yogurt looked over. "You don't get to have an opinion about what I do because we're not married." I didn't say anything for a few seconds. I was aware of the cart handle under my hand, the cold coming off the open freezer case beside us, the sound of her sister's voice still calling her name from the phone. Something in me went quiet in a way I recognized from work. The same stillness that comes right before you tell a client a structure has failed inspection. "Okay," I said. That was all. I pushed the cart forward, toward the registers, and didn't ask another question. Vanessa followed, talking, explaining something about her brother's lease and how she'd been under pressure and hadn't known what else to do. I heard maybe half of it. I was already somewhere else, counting. I didn't look back to see if she was still talking. 3 weeks before any of this happened, Vanessa and I had an appointment at the bank to start the pre-approval process for a mortgage. We'd been saving toward a house for almost 2 years, and the house fund had finally crossed the number our realtor told us we needed to start looking seriously. The advisor assigned to our file was a man named Marcus Webb, mid-40s, the kind of person who read every line of a document before he spoke instead of skimming for the highlights. Marcus had been doing mortgage advising for almost 20 years, and it showed in the way he talked about numbers, not like sales, like facts. When Vanessa joked that she hoped the bank wouldn't judge us for our takeout spending, he didn't laugh along the way most people would. He just said, "I don't care what you spend on takeout. I care what's actually in the account when I pull the file." It wasn't unfriendly. It was just exact. He told us he'd need to verify the current balance directly before submitting anything, and that he liked to do that in person when he could, because numbers on paper and numbers in conversation didn't always match. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Standing in the cereal aisle 3 weeks later, phone still warm in my hand, I thought about it differently. Marcus would need to read that balance out loud eventually, in front of whoever happened to be in the room. He was already going to be the one to say it. I didn't confront Vanessa again after the grocery store. I didn't bring up the $15,000. Didn't ask follow-up questions. Didn't raise my voice about any of it over the next several days. I called Marcus instead, told him we were ready to move forward with the pre-approval, and asked if there was a way to schedule the balance verification at a specific time. He said he could do it that week if we wanted, and I told him the following Saturday worked better for me. Vanessa noticed I'd gone quiet, but she read it as me processing, maybe even forgiving. She started talking again about house listings, about paint colors, like the version of the conversation in the grocery store had already closed. I let her think that. I went to work, came home, ate dinner across the table from her, and never once mentioned the $15,000 again. Her family was hosting a dinner that Saturday, something Vanessa had been planning for weeks, a celebration, she said, now that the house fund had hit its target. I didn't correct her. I just confirmed the time with Marcus one more time and told myself I wasn't planning anything. I was only making sure the right person would be in the room when the truth finally said itself. Update 1. Saturday evening, 6:30, at Vanessa's parents' house. Her mother had set the dining table with the good wine glasses, the ones that only came out for holidays, and someone had taped a small handwritten sign to the wall that read, "Congratulations on the new house." The lighting was warm, low, the kind people use when they want a room to feel like an occasion. Vanessa sat at the head of the table next to her father, halfway through telling her parents how close we were to closing on a house, how proud she was of how much we'd saved. Her father poured wine for everyone but left Vanessa's glass with water, joking that she should celebrate sober so she'd remember it. I sat across from her, eating slowly, watching the doorbell sit silent for now. She had no idea Marcus was already on his way, his car pulling into the driveway with a folder of paperwork on the passenger seat. The doorbell rang at 6:45, and Vanessa's mother answered it, already smiling because she assumed it was the neighbor she'd invited for dessert. Instead, it was Marcus Webb, in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder under one arm, looking exactly like what he was, a professional finishing a piece of business on a Saturday because that was what the job required. He didn't look around the room or take in the framed photos on the wall the way most strangers would. He walked like a man who already knew exactly where he was going. He had a calm, unhurried way of moving, the kind of walk that makes a room quiet down a little even before anyone knows why. "I'm so sorry to interrupt your evening," he said to Vanessa's mother. "I'm Marcus, from the bank. I just need 5 minutes with Ethan and Vanessa." Her mother, confused but polite, waved him toward the dining room. "Of course, come in, we're just finishing dinner." Marcus crossed the room, pausing only when Vanessa's father stood to introduce himself, shaking his hand and asking if he wanted a glass of wine. Marcus declined politely, said he wouldn't be long, and continued toward the table where Vanessa was still sitting with her napkin in her lap, smiling, clearly assuming this was some kind of pleasant surprise related to the house. I watched her face change in 3 distinct stages. First, before she understood anything, she looked delighted, already turning to her mother to say, "This is the advisor I told you about, from the bank." Then came the moment of recognition, when Marcus opened the folder and her eyes dropped to the page in his hand, and something behind her expression went still, the way a person goes still right before they remember a lie they told. After that came the third stage, the one that lasted, her face emptying out entirely, color leaving it the way it leaves a room when someone switches off the lights. I wanted to confirm the current balance on the joint account before I finalized the pre-approval paperwork, Marcus said, reading directly from the page, his voice even and procedural. As of this morning, the balance is $41,200. That's about $15,000 below what we discussed at our last meeting. The table went silent. Vanessa's sister, sitting across from her, set her wine glass down without drinking from it, her eyes moving between Vanessa and the folder. 41,000? Vanessa's father repeated, looking at Vanessa. I thought you said it was over 50. You told us you two were ready. Where did $15,000 go? Her mother asked, the handwritten sign on the wall behind her suddenly looking like a joke nobody wanted to acknowledge. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed once before anything came out. I can explain, she said. The same two words she had used in the grocery store, except this time there was no aisle to hide in. No sister on a phone she could pretend not to notice, just her whole family looking at her across a table set for a celebration that no longer made sense. I gave some of it to David, she said finally, looking at her brother's empty chair, since he hadn't been invited to this particular dinner. His truck was about to get repossessed. I didn't want to make it a whole thing. You told us the fund was at $56,000 2 weeks ago, her father said. Quieter now, the kind of quiet that comes from someone doing math they don't want to be doing. You told us that at this table. Her mother set down the serving spoon she had been holding since the doorbell rang and asked, very evenly, how long Vanessa had known the real number before tonight. Vanessa said she found out the day it happened, the day at the grocery store, and her mother asked why. In that case, she had still let everyone believe a different number for 2 more weeks, had still let the sign go up on the wall, had still let her own mother tell the neighbors there was good news coming. Vanessa didn't have an answer ready for that one. She looked down at the tablecloth instead, and her father picked the folder up off the table where Marcus had set it down, turning it toward himself to read the number a second time, as if reading it again might change it. Marcus, who had no idea he had just become the instrument of someone else's reckoning, closed the folder gently and looked between the three of them with the practiced neutrality of a man who delivers difficult numbers for a living. He glanced briefly at me, just once, no read on his face at all, before looking back to the family. I can step out and let you all talk, he said. I just needed the number confirmed for the file. Nobody answered him right away. Vanessa was still looking at her father, her hand flat on the table like she needed something solid under it, and the last thing she said before the room fully turned away from her was so quiet I almost missed it. I didn't think it would matter this much. I left before dessert, telling Vanessa's mother I had an early start the next day, which wasn't true but felt necessary. Vanessa stayed behind, and I didn't see what happened after Marcus left, but her sister, Claire, texted me a full account 2 hours later. She wrote that their parents had sat Vanessa down at the kitchen table for almost an hour after I left, going through the timeline of what she'd told them versus what was actually true, and that her father had said he didn't know what else she might be lying about. Claire said Vanessa cried, but it wasn't the kind of crying that made anyone in the room move toward her. I read the message twice, sitting in my car in the driveway of my own apartment. Something in me settled, quiet, not triumphant, the feeling of finally putting down a box I'd been carrying with both arms for longer than I'd admitted to myself. I didn't text Claire back right away. I sat there for a while, thinking less about Vanessa and more about what an apartment with just my name on the lease might actually look like. And for the first time in months, that thought didn't scare me. Update 2. Vanessa called me 11 times over the next 4 days. When I didn't pick up, she switched to texting, long messages that started apologetic and ended accusatory, telling me I had humiliated her on purpose in front of her entire family, that I could have just talked to her privately instead of letting Marcus ambush her at dinner. She showed up at my office on the 5th day, waiting in the lobby until my coworker came to tell me, and when I came down, she said, in front of the security desk, that I owed her an explanation for what I did to her. I didn't do anything, I said. Marcus did his job. You did the rest. She didn't like that answer. The next escalation came 2 days later, when she called Marcus directly at the bank and asked him to tell her parents the numbers had been wrong, that there had been some kind of clerical error. Marcus told her, calmly, that he couldn't do that, since the figure was accurate and he had a professional obligation not to misrepresent it to anyone, including her family. She pushed harder, asked if he could at least say it was unclear, and he repeated that he wouldn't, and the call ended badly enough that he made a note of it in case anyone followed up. Someone did follow up. Her father called the bank 2 days later to confirm the number for himself, and Marcus, bound by the same obligation, mentioned that Vanessa had called and asked him to alter what he'd told the family. Her father relayed that to her mother, and within a week, the story in that house wasn't about $15,000 anymore. It was about a daughter who had tried to get a bank employee to lie for her, on top of everything else. It wasn't a dramatic call. Claire's voice was just tired. She called me on a Tuesday night, almost 3 weeks after the dinner, not to update me on Vanessa exactly, just to talk, since we'd stayed in touch since everything fell apart. Partway through the conversation, almost as an aside, she mentioned that David's food truck had closed permanently the week before. The $15,000 hadn't been enough. It covered the back lease and one supplier invoice, but not the engine repair the truck needed, and David had decided to cut his losses rather than keep bleeding money into something already sinking. Vanessa took it hard, Claire said. Harder than David did, honestly. He's already talking about driving for a delivery app. She's the one who keeps bringing it up. I asked, carefully, how their parents were handling it, and Claire went quiet for a second before answering. She said their mother had stopped calling Vanessa every morning the way she used to, the daily check-in that had been a routine for as long as Claire could remember. Their father had started asking Claire questions, instead what Vanessa was actually doing with her money now, whether she'd paid back any of what she'd taken, questions he used to never have needed to ask, because he used to just trust what Vanessa told him. Claire said it felt less like questions and more like an audit. He asked me last week if I thought she was being honest about her rent, Claire said. About rent, Ethan. Not the $15,000, just regular, basic rent. She didn't say anything else about what that meant. She didn't have to. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment after we hung up, thinking about a dinner table with a sign on the wall that nobody had bothered to take down yet. I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment on the north side of the city, 20 minutes from my old place, close enough to keep my commute the same and far enough that it felt like a different life. I moved my own things in over a weekend: my drafting table, the bookshelf I'd built myself in college, a coffee maker I'd never had to share with anyone else's preferences about how strong it should be. The first night there, I cooked dinner for one person, which meant I didn't have to check whether anyone else liked the kind of rice I was using, or whether the portion was too small or too much. I ate standing at the kitchen counter because I hadn't bought a table yet, looking out a window that faced a parking lot instead of a yard, and it was, without question, the quietest a room had felt in over a year. I didn't think about house funds or dinner tables or $15,000. I just ate, and the silence wasn't something I needed to fill. Final update. 2 months after the dinner, Vanessa was losing the exact thing she had chosen over me, piece by piece, in a house that used to feel like the safest place she had. Claire told me about it over coffee, the first time we'd met up in person since everything happened, since she said it felt strange anymore to only talk over text. She said their parents had started hosting Sunday dinners again, the same kind of dinner where Marcus had stood with his folder, except now there were only 3 places set at the table instead of 4. Nobody had taken the old handwritten sign down from that first dinner, Claire said. It was still taped to the wall, the corners starting to curl. Vanessa had stopped coming most weeks, not because anyone told her not to, but because the conversation always seemed to circle back to money, and she couldn't sit through it anymore. Mom doesn't ask her to come the way she used to, Claire said, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table. She used to call her every Sunday morning, remind her, ask if she needed a ride. Now she just mentions it once. Almost like she's bracing for Vanessa to say no. I asked how Vanessa was doing for money now, mostly out of old habit, the way you still check on a bridge you used to drive over every day even after you've taken a different route to work. Claire said Vanessa was renting alone in a smaller apartment than the one we used to share, that she'd had to ask their parents for a loan for the security deposit, and that their father had said yes, but had made her sign something actual paper, an actual agreement before he'd hand over the check. She told me Vanessa's new apartment didn't have a dishwasher, and that she'd mentioned it 3 times in one phone call, like it mattered more than it should, like it was the only safe thing left to complain about. She told me last week she didn't think anyone in the family trusted her with anything anymore, Claire said. Not even small stuff. Mom asked her to pick up a prescription for Dad, and then called the pharmacy herself to confirm she'd actually gone. I sat with that for a second, turning my own cup in a slow circle the way Claire had been doing with hers. What I felt was quiet, something closer to finally exhaling after holding a breath I hadn't realized I was still holding. It's been 5 months since the dinner. I close on the house next week, on my own, with a mortgage Marcus helped me finalize after I qualified individually, The down payment exactly what was left in an account that now only has my name attached to it. I picked a one-story place with a small backyard, a chain-link fence already in place that I'd need to replace within the year, mostly because I liked the idea of mowing a lawn that belonged to no one but me. I still hear from Claire occasionally, mostly normal things, nothing about Vanessa unless I ask, which I rarely do anymore. Vanessa texted me once last month, a short message asking how I was doing, and I read it twice before deciding not to answer. I'm not wiser than I was the day my phone buzzed in that grocery store. I just don't carry anything I didn't put down myself. I am free, which is not the same thing as being right, and it is not the same thing as being over it. It is simply the only thing that matters now.